Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare. Prabhupada, 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 Jaya Jaya, Prabhupada, Jaya. Jai Gaur Premanande, Hari Hari Bol. Maybe if you have a space, please move forward, everybody, as far as you can, so more devotee can be accommodated in the temple room. Please move forward, Mataji, Hare Krishna. Everybody in the front, please move forward. Ready?
You've got upstairs. It's there,
Yeah,
isn't
also,
it?
just
Yeah, a little
more
bit.
people. Something's there.
In the narration of the history of the Melbourne Temple, in our first part, which you may have heard, I described the years direct. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare were given enthusiastically. Prabhupada was very eager to encourage whatever little spark of self-surrender he found in others. And so he said, he said, yes, of course you can do that. And so they did. And Upendra went to Melbourne with Upananda Das Brahmachari and a resident of the southern lands, Śrīmad Krishna Prema Prabhu, who was known as Bhakta Frank. So the Krishna consciousness movement took its roots in South Yarra, near the Melbourne Botanical Gardens. That was the first little centre. They were paying $10 a week rent. It was something which they could not turn down. And every day they would preach Krishna consciousness in the streets of Sydney. In fact, it was Bhakta Frank that recalled his first Harinam, the first Harinam in Melbourne. He said, I had travelled from the Sydney temple to help Upendra and Upananda in Melbourne. One crisp, late winter morning, it was a Monday, we caught a tram from Domain Road to downtown Melbourne, and we walked from Burke Street to the town hall in our deities, shiny, shaven heads, carrying a box of Back to Godhead magazines, mridanga, and kartals. People had never seen the devotees before in Melbourne. And the crowds sort of parted before us. Outside the town hall, Upendra said, we should wait until the clock struck 12. This was the auspicious Abhijit moment, in fact, and an auspicious time to start the Sankirtan movement in Melbourne. At the last dong of the clock, Upendra started playing kartals. Actually, Upendra was playing mridanga and Frank was playing kartals, and heads turned. People literally stopped dead in their tracks. Within a few minutes, there were many hundreds of people crowded around us, spilling onto the road and blocking traffic. We practically stopped the whole of Swanston Street, Frank said. The police had to hold the crowds back to allow the cars to pass. Then Upendra stood up on the steps of the Melbourne Town Hall and gave a short but spirited talk while I, Dr. Frank, furiously handed out Back to Godhead magazines and collected donations. And he said the Hare Krishna movement had started officially at that time. So on Sundays, the devotees would go out chanting, and they would have a little Sunday feast. And they found that the South Yarra place was insufficient for their use, so they started looking for a bigger place. South Yarra was a temporary residence, and soon they moved to a single-story terrace house in Carlton. By the way, at this stage, you may be wondering about this picture behind me. Yes, it is the Melbourne Temple, and yes, these are the original residents of the Krishna consciousness movement in Melbourne, and there I am, right up the back. And there's a whole lot of beautiful faces here. Some of these devotees have since passed on. This was a very classic shot, and you know where this was taken, of course, in the front garden, around 75. So yes, the Hare Krishna temple moved, and it moved to Station Street in Carlton. This was the first real temple of the International Society for Krishna Consciousness in Melbourne. A number of devotees joined at this time, Mekala, Shamananda, Sanaka, Chekitana, and some others, Dwapayana and Jayadharma. They actually joined the Melbourne Temple while they were in South Yarra. These are the classical members of the Krishna consciousness movement in the southern regions of Australia. So by now, it was the end of 1971. We find that the Melbourne Temple has moved to St Kilda, a holy place of pilgrimage, 14 Burnett Street in St Kilda. 14 Burnett Street, of course, is a classical tirtha. It was at 14 Burnett Street, where the Hare Krishna movement was based for 3 years, that Sri Sri Radha and Krishna our very same Sri Radha Krishna from the altar, they were installed in St Kilda in 1972. And Radha Vallabha were installed in 1973, and Jagannath appeared actually also in 1972. So Prabhupada first arrived in Australia on the invitation of his disciples in Melbourne on the 5th of April 1972, and he came to us while we were in St Kilda. He offered initiations, and a host of men and women received their first and second initiations on the 6th of April 1972. This was the date of the installation of Radha and Krishna. I received my second initiation that day, along with Jagatarini Devi Dasi, and there were many first initiations and some marriages at that time. In the same year, Deepak Prabhu, my first temple president and head pujari of Melbourne, and Dwaipayana Prabhu, who had joined in South Yarra, and the wife of Deepak, whose name was Nartaki, who's now residing in Bombay. You may have met Nartaki. They carved the beautiful Lord Jagannath from a lump of wood, as in the classical style. And these beautiful deities that you see on the altar were carved at the Hare Krishna shop in Little Lonsdale Street. And then they were placed on the Rath in 1972 for the first Melbourne Rath-Yatra, and that was their formal appearance to everyone, an initiation. So Srila Prabhupada then visited Australia another time. He visited Melbourne on the 8th of February 1973. At that historical occasion, Sri Radha Vallabha were installed on the altar. So now we have Radha and Krishna, small Radha and Krishna, we have Radha Vallabha, and we have Jagannath, Baladev, and Subhadra. Now, at this time, the Melbourne temple was getting rather cramped. There were 10 rooms, but they were not huge rooms, and the Krishna consciousness movement was attracting many boys and girls. Madhavisa, who was the GBC and the beloved Madhavisa Swami, who inspired us all, he started looking for a new temple which was suitable to serve as Australia's headquarters. He wasn't thinking small, he wanted a wonderful temple. Prabhupada had given full approval 6 months before to find a temple, but we had not found one. So, it's now 1974. Madhavisa has located a small property. Actually, no, he's located a huge property, should I say, an enormous collection of church and convent buildings covering many acres on the Beach Road, Beaconsfield Parade, which is parallel to Danks Street. He informed Srila Prabhupada of his find, and Srila Prabhupada expressed interest. Later, Madhavisa wrote a letter to Prabhupada, and he said, we found a huge property. I'm going to send you photos. It's a large church and convent. The real estate men report that it will go for at least $1 million, and $1 million in 1975 was, 1974 was a huge amount. He requested that perhaps the BBT could make us a loan, and Prabhupada was not at all negative about the proposal. He was very enthusiastic. So we were going for the white elephant. In other words, it was a huge property, a huge 10 acres of buildings. And Prabhupada was very interested in the proposal. Madhavisa wrote to Prabhupada, as I said, and he said, when you come for your third visit to Melbourne in 1974, we can talk about it further, which they did. So in 1974, Prabhupada danced and enthusiastically chanted throughout Melbourne on the famous Melbourne Rath-Yatra. This was the third Melbourne Rath-Yatra. And again, Prabhupada mentioned that the Melbourne temple was very congested. So one morning, Srila Prabhupada took a morning walk on Beaconsfield Parade with Madhavisa and some other devotees. It was very windy. Prabhupada was wrapped in his chadar and he walked along. The temple was not in Albert Park, the temple was in St Kilda. So they were walking the other way from St Kilda down the beach road. And when they got to the spot in Albert Park, where the huge Catholic church complex was situated, Prabhupada was shown this building. Prabhupada was explained by Madhuvisa that this was a convent for girls. From the street, he directed Prabhupada's attention to the other features of the property: a huge chapel, commercial side laundry rooms, a theatre, eating quarters. This is almost 10 acres of prime beachside real estate, Srila Prabhupada, he said. Prabhupada was interested. How much are they asking? Well, over $1 million, Srila Prabhupada. Prabhupada said nothing, but he appeared unfazed by that price. And later he said he would like to see inside the property. So a few days later, Prabhupada Madhuvisa arranged for a tour of the beachside property. After breakfast, the devotees accompanied Srila Prabhupada on a morning walk and they visited the convent. They were shown around by a real estate agent and some elderly nuns. The devotees noticed how Prabhupada was so respectful. He held his palms together before the stained glass windows of the chapel. He asked the nuns, "Is this Jesus? Is this Mary?" And when Prabhupada reached the altar area, he bowed his head reverentially. On returning to the car after the short tour, Prabhupada made his intentions clear. Yes, he said, we should buy that place, offer them $1 million. So, what happened next? This was a few days before the Rath Yatra, and then after the Rath Yatra, Prabhupada wrote to Madhuvisa. Now, about that convent, he said, which you showed me, I think that place is very suitable for us, and if possible, we must purchase it. So the reasonable price should be on the land value. So far, the buildings are concerned, they have already dismantled part of it, as they were noting when they visited, and it will be our expenditure to rebuild. Considering these points and talk with the realty man at what price they can sell the property to us. I'm going to Los Angeles, and along with me there is Bali Madan. If this matter is successful, you can call me in LA. I will be there for a week. How much financial help you require, you can talk to me and I will do the needful. I hope this meets you in good health. Prabhupada was expert in all things, including real estate. So, however, things took a turn after that. And a few weeks after Prabhupada had seen the place, because everyone visited the convent in their dhotis and saris, and it was a little confronting for the Catholic authorities. In fact, the church authorities gave Madhuvisa a decisive caveat to the sale. Sale would be conditional that the chapel be demolished. For whatever their reasons, they were afraid, and that was the condition. Regarding the convent, Prabhupada wrote, they have put an awkward condition that the chapel must be demolished. Excuse me. Indirectly, they have denied to sell it to us. Never mind, he said, find another property. Prabhupada wrote a PS because he had met some very high-level church authorities in Melbourne for his 1974 visit, the Bishop of Melbourne, the Reverend Gordon Powell from the Scottish Church, and Bishop Kelly, and he asked that they perhaps help us in our negotiations with the Catholic Church. However, he noted the proposal is malicious, but they can rectify it. But the owners, the Catholic Church, were adamant and the convent property was abandoned. So, unfortunately, we didn't get that property. But not long after this, a much smaller but more suitable property was found only 1 block away in nearby Danks Street Albert Park. It consisted of 2 buildings, Our Lady of Mount Carmel Boys' School and an adjoining Victorian mansion. The whole property covered an area of 23,500 square feet. Madhavisa sent photos and plans of the property to Prabhupada, who commented that it appears that the house is very nice and sufficient for the present. That was 50 years ago, and now, of course, it is too small, but we couldn't imagine how that would be possible. But, of course, the Krishna consciousness movement has grown. Still, Prabhupada said, it appears that the house is very nice and sufficient for the present. The convent was a better place. Either way, any of the houses you can secure. Of course, the first house was already at this stage, not one of the choices. Madhavisa enthusiastically pursued all opportunities to purchase that property on Danks Street as the new ISKCON Australian headquarters. But there were problems again. The Catholic Church were expressing the same reservations at selling us the property. So at that stage, we went incognito, and all negotiations were then conducted in plain clothes. And the owners were then not aware that the devotees were wanting to purchase. And this was at the stage when the property, 197 Danks Street, was in fact sold to a property developer for many thousands of dollars less than ISKCON's bidding price. So there was definitely some maliciousness involved. We would never sell this property to the Hare Krishnas, was the mood of the Catholic Church at the time. But the story, of course, as you probably realize, didn't end there. Even though the 197 Danks Street was officially sold to a property developer, the property developer found that he was in financial difficulties. He had not reckoned that the older of the properties, 2 buildings, the beautiful property that you see behind us here, this is the original building, and it was owned by the National Trust, and Australia's Historical Building Register recorded that this building could not be demolished, and the local council then refused to grant permission to this property developer to build apartments on the vacant land, which is now the garden and car park area. They refused to grant permission. And so the buyers' plan to demolish buildings and subdivide the land and construct apartments were all thwarted. So at this stage, ISKCON once again appeared, as I said, in plain clothes, and offered to purchase the property back off the developer. And the man accepted. So thus, eventually, 197 Danks Street, the International Society for Krishna Consciousness's first Australian headquarters, was purchased for an amount less than the original bidding price. This was 1974. Prabhupada was very, very happy to hear the news. This new property, he suggested, although substantially smaller than the huge convent, would also be more practical and easier to maintain. He told us a very, very nice story in this connection. A man, he said, once saw some beautiful big golden earrings in a store, and he became attracted to them, and he had a desire to purchase them. And his desire increased and increased. But the golden earrings were beyond his budget. So he took an extra job and worked long hours and finally got the money, and he purchased the golden earrings. Prabhupada continued with the story, but when he put them on, he said, he discovered that these earrings were so big and so heavy that they constantly gave him an earache and pulled on his ears. So in the end, he was forced to take them off. Prabhupada said that the moral of the story was that if one tries for something beyond his means, it would be a burden from beginning to end. Better, Prabhupada said, therefore, to get something manageable, even if smaller, and utilize the time thus saved in preaching. So that very nice story is related in my book. You may have read it. Madhavisa sent Prabhupada regular updates on the property, including descriptions and photographs. Prabhupada authorized that the deity should face east, and the installation of Krishna's Sudarshan chakra on the roof, that was approved by Srila Prabhupada. And Prabhupada was invited to come and inaugurate the temple. And this letter was sent to Prabhupada, and Prabhupada accepted the invitation. And the original plans were that he would come in January of 1975. But of course, we were not ready in January of 1975, so the plans were adjusted. They were adjusted twice, but the first adjustment was January is too early because there is so much work to do on the property. Renovation work on the new Melbourne property began at furious pace. Both buildings had been derelict. They needed extensive restoration. The ground floor was originally, we're talking about the ground floor of the other building, the temple building, not this building that you see here. That was originally classrooms. This was a boys' school. I'll tell you more about this later. And so this was the science rooms of the original boys' school, and that was going to be earmarked as the temple and deity room. And this building, of course, Prabhupada House, was very ornate. One large upstairs room, which had originally been a chapel for the priests, was set aside as Prabhupada's personal quarters. The rest of the building was earmarked for offices, a kitchen and a library. And soon we worked furiously to bring this building up to scratch. January 1975 deadline came and went. It couldn't be reached. And then, this was right at the end of 1974, Madhavisa wrote to Prabhupada, "Can you come later after the Mayapur festival in 1975? Prabhupada had already planned his travel itinerary and he had told many devotees of his movements. But he was so adoring of his disciple, Madhavisa Swami, and so encouraging that he said yes. And he graciously adjusted his travel plans and arrive in Melbourne in May of 1975, of which this 50th anniversary is a celebration. However, the back-breaking months had passed and we were still not ready. The marble floor hadn't yet been poured, hadn't yet been laid in the temple. In fact, the concrete had not even been poured to place the marble on top of. And there were hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of smaller jobs. And Madhavisa calculated in discussion with his work crew, the devotees did everything except the marble, that they would fall short by 2 weeks. They would be 2 weeks short. So Madhavisa was pressed to make a decision. Should he again bother Srila Prabhupada to adjust his travel plans? He thought not. Instead, he considered an alternative. Prabhupada might prefer to visit somewhere else in Australia first. He was in Bombay at present, and he was due to arrive in Melbourne. Someone suggested Perth. They told Madhavisa that Perth would be geographically a good place for Prabhupada to stop. The weather was pleasant. There were no devotees in Perth. There was no ISKCON temple there. But it was directly on the way from India. And it wouldn't be difficult to rent a place there because there were some devotees in Melbourne at the time that originally came from Perth, Risha and Ganesh specifically. This would give the temple devotees in Melbourne enough time to finish the construction, and it would give Prabhupada an opportunity to so-called rest, although Prabhupada's resting was his preaching. It would give him 2 weeks to recuperate from his rigors of administration and traveling. Madhavisa contacted Prabhupada, and Prabhupada graciously agreed. And in early May of 1975, Prabhupada's plans were finalized. He would stay in Delhi for a few days. He would travel to Bombay for 1 day and then depart for Perth in Western Australia. They're having their 50th anniversary at the time of this recording. By the time you hear this, the Perth 50th anniversary celebrations would have ceased. And now, of course, we're in the throes of a wonderful celebration here in Melbourne. So Prabhupada was destined to visit Melbourne for the grand inauguration of the new headquarters for his thriving Australasian zone. And Prabhupada had agreed, and there was just time separating, 2 weeks in fact, for the whole Melbourne temple to be refurbished before Srila Prabhupada's historical visit. And that visit, the continuation of that story, the opening, the actual inauguration of the temple will be presented to you in part 2 of this recording. So I thank you for listening, and I encourage you to read The Great Transcendental Adventure and get a copy and immerse yourself in Srila Prabhupada's transcendental pastimes. I hope your festival is going wonderfully. I'm sure it is. And I hope that my little recording here has allowed you some access to the wonderful pastimes of Lord Chaitanya and Lord Nityananda, and of course, Srila Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. All glories to Srila Prabhupada.
Pass it on. Want to say anything? Anyone wants to say something? Hare Krishna Prabhu, do you want to add something to what Kurma Prabhu has said?
No, I don't have anything now.
Not now? Anyone?
Sorry.
I'm going to be speaking later on.
Anyway, okay. Come on, he was here. Say something. I don't know what to say. Oh, think about the day you were here. All I can think about is the Prabhupada. Yeah, bathing the beard. You're going to talk about that, right? Your own experience of it. They want something. They want something here.
Want to say something?
Two of the senior ladies to speak.
I did ask her, they don't. Rasarani, we have been asked. Hare, Hare, can you pass this?
Why doesn't Myrtle want to say something? And we have to go to bring Dasa. They're asking you. I don't remember. You weren't here.
You were just telling a great story.
What about you, Vimala? Vimala. You're on the spot. Vimala, you were here.
No, I wasn't here at the opening, no. We didn't come till late 75. It already been opened. Yeah.
I mean, I was here, but I can't remember.
Hare Krishna, we will play the second video also now.
I remember,
No?
helping by Babu with the columns and seeing it. Well, no, there must be someone better.
Hello. Oh, Krishna. The only thing is, if you do it, it might fire them up.
Okay.
So yeah, if you can. Just to get them. Make sure those sounds good.
Sound So get the sounds like come on.
You're going to turn it off.
Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna. It's okay. Let's hear. Is that loud enough? 3, 2, 1. Listening. Hare Krishna. I used to be a school teacher and we'd do that all the time and the kids would go, whoa. Someone put the mic in my hand and I haven't a clue really what to say, but we thought that you got to start somewhere. So you can put up with me for a couple of minutes and then somebody else will get inspired and we'll give the mic to them and it'll be all good fun. The little lady, I think, and she has to correct me if I'm wrong, on the photo next Kurma, down at the right-hand side, is that you, Vimala? So that's my wife just down in the right-hand corner there. And I think I'm under Kurma's nose. Hare Krishna. And somebody just asked me, were you there at that time, Prabhupada? And I said, yes, I was in Melbourne, and it took me quite a while to actually get to the point of full-time joining. I visited in 1972 Little Lonsdale Street and was stunned by, all of a sudden, when I went to that program, a combi wagon turned up. And out of the combi wagon came these two golden figures of Nitai Gaur. And then when they entered this shop front where we were having the program, everyone hit the ground. And I was stunned. I thought, what is this? And somebody said, that's God. And I thought, okay, I'll try that. So for 3 years, that's another whole story, but for 3 years I was there. I got a Mogaji and Hare Sori. Hare Sori, I think, was the first person I met in downtown Melbourne. And I asked him a question, and an hour and a half later, we were still standing in the street, talking. And so they turned the lights on in my life, and then Amoga gave me a Bhagavad Gita. I've still got that Bhagavad Gita, I still got the same Bhagavad Gita, in the street in downtown Melbourne. So, but I wasn't ready to become a monk. It wasn't on my to-do list that you should become a monk. And I was struggling with that, and I couldn't make that commitment at that time. So looking back at it, it was basically Krishna wanted to pick up my wife because she had to come to Krishna consciousness too. So that 3 years, and I'm going to tell the story. Please, whenever I could talk forever here about the whole thing, but fast forward, I met Vimala, who was then called Therese. And then the next thing that happened, what was the next thing that happened was, yes, so I was a vegetarian. I immediately gave up eating meat when I'd read, listening to Hare Sori Prabhupada and Morgan and the Bhagavad Gita, so we gave up meat. So I was a vegetarian, my wife wasn't. And we got engaged to be married after 2 or 3 years. And we built a house down in Melton, which is one of the wherever just up the road there. We built a house down there. We were just about to get married, and I came from a Protestant sort of background. My wife was Catholic. And you heard about the Catholic Church. It was, you know, so we were talking, where are we going to get married? And I came from Scotland originally, that's where I come from. And so will we get married here? And anyway, she said, all this time you've always been interested in this Hare Krishna thing. And why don't you get clear on what you should do about it? So I said, okay, I think maybe that's a good idea. So off I went to the Hare Krishna temple. And after a day with Madhavisa Maharaj and Balaram, it was at the time, spent the time, and I said, I came back home and she said, well, how did you go with that? Are you sorted out there? She said, yeah, well, pretty much. I said, I'm going to join the Hare Krishna movement. And then she was stunned, and then I said, but there's some good news. She said, well, what's the good news? She said, you can come too. Thus began a lifetime of transformation for my dear wife. But we'll save those past. I'm sure somebody else has got some ideas now, and I can pass this mic to someone else, and we'll come back to that story. Amogham.
Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Prabhu stirred up a memory out of my brain. This one time I was doing books at Flinders Station. I had a back-to-Godhead box. We always used to use these boxes for everything. And I had books and magazines in the box. And you had to try to use some kind of thing to get people going. So I was holding an incense stick. I hold it out to somebody coming towards me and I twirl it like this and it'd go and they would laugh. Then we got started, you know, so this one guy came walking along, he started talking to me, and I gave him a book. I said, oh, that's a nice book. How much should I give you for the book? And I said, well, up to you. He said, all right, and he gave me $20. And that was a lot of money back then. So I thought, wow, I better give him another book. So I said, well, that's a nice donation. Here's another book. So I had different books. And he said, wow, that's far out. Well, how much should I give you? And I said, well, up to you. So he gave me another $20-something, and I thought, wow, this is the best one of the week. I'm going to give him another book. And good to have a few different books. And I don't remember how long it took, but he ran out of cash. And he was in ecstasy, a big smile, and he's standing with his hands like under the stack of books all the way to his chin. Walked away, big smile. And then we came to find out later what happened was he got home where his friends were, and they were waiting for him to come back. And they said, did you get the stuff? He said, no, I didn't get that, but I got these really fantastic books. You what? We spend all our dope money on books. And then he started coming to the temple. He started coming to the temple on Danks Street here. He was coming for, I think, a few months, and then one day he was going out the front gate, and we'd always say, bye-bye, Haribo. And I said, why don't you just join the temple? And he said, yes, I'm going to join the temple. So he joined the temple and became initiated later, and his name is Brihaspati Das. Next.
Anybody else would like to say a few words? We're 10 minutes away from prasadam, so if any of the senior devotees... Jaidama Prabhu, you were here at the time. Perhaps you can relate some stories?
I could tell a few stories. I didn't expect to speak, but it's overwhelming to visit the temple after 40 years. of being away in northern Queensland. But my experiences of the temple are almost primeval. Is that I was, in 1970, I was walking through the markets in Sydney, and Baibabi had magazines. Baibabi's Chiru's wife, she's an artist. She managed the renovations of the temple here, I believe. And so she was smiling, and all the people I were with were really rude to her. Anyway, I gave her $10, which was a lot of money in 1970, and took her back to Godhead. So, so what Prabhupada says about the books is true. I put that book on my coffee table, and it sat there for a year. And then one night, during a party, everybody said, I kept it there because all the devotees looked so happy. They're all smiling and hands in the air, and it was beautiful. And all my friends at a party, they said, you know, they started to make terrible comments. So it was my house, so I moved out of the house. I thought we were alternative culture. We're just narrow-minded, opinionated, critical rascals, probably in other words I used in those days. But then, back in Melbourne where I lived, I was lucky enough to get a Krishna book. They were in the shops in 1971. So then I was reading Krishna book, and I was walking down Swanson Burke on the corner there. It was freezing cold, you know, Melbourne. And there was Upendra. So he invited me to the temple, and I went there, and all he did was talk about Prabhupada. I don't know why I'm getting so emotional. All he did was talk about Prabhupada. Prabhupada this, Prabhupada that, Prabhupada this tall, Prabhupada talks like this, Prabhupada says this. And so I went back to where they were staying, and it was in a place called Parkview, opposite the park where Prabhupada would sometimes walk. And they were in a room, and they were freezing. So they said, would you like prasadam? I said, yeah, I'd love some prasadam. So they served, they said, this is all we've got. So it looked like they'd got old vegetables from the bottom of the fridge and boiled them in some water with a bit of salt and turmeric. it wasn't pleasant, but you know. And I said, and they said, you're coming to the Sunday feast. And I said, you got a Sunday feast? And they said, yeah, okay, I'll come to the Sunday feast. There was Upendra, who's a Upananda, Ahula, Upananda's wife. And so, is it better? So I came to the Sunday feast, and they said, would you like to help cook? Actually, I've been in the kitchen all morning cooking. It was just, that's probably why I'm emotional. It was just fabulous. We cooked a few things with Ghana Samudra. So anyway, they said, would you like to help cook? I said, yeah, I'd love to. I was spicing. I'd love to learn this stuff. So they took me into the kitchen, and in the kitchen, they were cooking. Upendra took me in the kitchen, and Upananda was cooking on the stove, and next to him on the stove was a fat Aussie in his underpants with a cigarette in his mouth, cooking sausages and eggs. And I went, ooh. and they explained it's a share house. Just let you know that before this, 5 temples back, it was a share house in Middle Park with some bongi cooking breakfast in his undies with a cigarette in his mouth. So to see the temple move this far is just amazing, you know. Like and the devotees were just distributing books. So that Back to Godhead, that Krishna, I brought the Krishna book for my 21st birthday. It was a birthday present. And it was from a bookshop in Collins Street called The Source. I don't know if it's still there. Probably not. 50 years later. 55 years. Actually, it's hard to even recognise Melbourne. But it just goes to show the absolute potency of these books. And I got a quote the other day from Prabhupada, and he was saying to, I think, Śrīmad actually. But I'll tell you a funny story about Śrīmad before I tell you the story about what Prabhupada says about his books. I'm having lunch in Govardhan Eco Village up from Mumbai, which is absolutely a fantastic project. It's really beautiful, it's really Prabhupada-centred. Anyway, so I'm sitting there and Śrīmad and I are talking, and we were talking about Prabhupada, of course, and I said, well, I was with Prabhupada in Perth. And he said, well, I was with Prabhupada in Perth. I said, well, I was with Prabhupada in Perth. And I said, well, Śrīmad was there, and he yelled out, I am Śrīmad. So he couldn't recognise me, I couldn't recognise him after 50 years. Anyway, Śrīmad gave a lecture at Govardhan Village, and he said in the lecture that Prabhupada said that anyone who has a book will make great spiritual advancement, become Krishna conscious. And then he said, well, anyone who reads a page, well, you've probably heard this, anybody who's read a page, anyone who's read a sentence, anyone who's read one word, even anybody who keeps the book. So that's what happened to me. I looked at the cover for about 6 months, that was all. And all I thought was, they look happy. And I'm not happy, you know, like in material existence, in, you know, trying to gratify the senses and on the platform of the mind. It's just, it's an unfortunate place to be in material consciousness, you know. It appears to me that Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada is present in his books, and that this movement is going to go on, because in the old days, you know what it was called, especially in Melbourne, front page? The Hare Krishna explosion. So, you know, it's exploded, you know, and the smoke has cleared, you know, the shrapnel is settled, but there is an aftermath. There must be a nuclear fusion, you know, and that is Prabhupada's books. Prabhupada's books will definitely change the world, and it's just wonderful to see the books going out, the chanting going on, and we know that despite any difficulties, I mean, even Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, Lord Nityananda himself met difficulties. They met Jagai Madai. We met Jagai last night on Sankirtan. She was ferocious, this woman. She had a bottle of alcohol in her hand, and she was absolutely ferocious. She tried to tip up all the sound equipment. She punched a few devotees. She pushed Adi Purush over. Adi Purush was laying on the ground, but a funny thing happened. She came up to me, and I was really scared. And I looked at her and smiled, and she smiled back and gave me a hug. Seriously, thank goodness. Because she was absolutely ferocious. She whacked Gana Samudra, she pushed over, Adipurush was laying on the ground, and anyway, but that was an interesting experience. So Prabhupada said that the Vani is far more important than Vapu, the Vani. So if we just hear the words of the Acharyas, Prabhupada also said we can read all the Acharyas' books, but first of all, you have to read all Prabhupada's books and know them. Then you can read other books. There's a trick. So we have to know Bhagavad Gita from the first word to the last word. We need to know Śrīmad Bhāgavatam. We need to know Chaitanya Chamrita, and then we need to know Nectar of Devotion, and then we can read all the writings of the Goswamis and Bhaktivedanta Thakur. But other books are not recommended by Prabhupada until we've read all of his books, and we can preach on that level of his books. And I love reading other books, by the Acharyas, but not by mental speculators or nonsense. So it's marvellous to see the potency of Prabhupada and the Hare Krishna explosion. I'm not sure if everybody knows that when Prabhupada arrived in Melbourne, the devotees had a Rolls Royce for him. You remember that? And can you remember what the press said to Prabhupada? They said, excuse me, Swami, are you a spiritual man? And he said, yes, I am a servant of God. And they said, well, what's the Rolls Royce doing parked out front for if you're a servant? And he said, I am servant of God. Bring me car made of diamonds. He said, what is this tinny Rolls Royce? It's simply a car made of tin. And so that was Prabhupada had a transcendental answer for everything, because we see a Rolls Royce, they're probably $500,000 these days, but that's just illusion. And what is illusion in the Vishwarupa? It's the smile of Krishna. Whenever you're attracted by illusion, just think, Krishna's smiling at me and it's just too much attractive, I'm going to look the other way. So I have to finish up now. Hare Krishna.
Hare Bol. Thanks, Jai Dharma. Now, one of the ladies would also like to, if we can pass the microphone to the ladies there. And breakfast will be served soon. Just to remind you that after breakfast at 10:30, again we gather here and we'll hear pastimes from both the 70s, 80s, 90s, noughties, and so on, about each individual's experience of being part of Melbourne Temple and what it meant to them. So please come at 10:30 for that. So, Sukla.
Hare Krishna, glories to Prabhupada. Ki Jaya, glories to the assembled devotees. I am going to speak later, possibly, maybe about the 75 era, but what a lot of people don't know, in 1972, the first Ratha Yatra and the Lonsdale Street store where Lord Jagannath was built, Madhavis had a fabulous idea that we were going to do a play for the first Ratha Yatra. And so on the Lonsdale Street store, there was a room upstairs. And at that particular time, the Netherlands Ballet Company had a big production at J.C. Williams Theatres. And it was a nude production, actually, of all the things. Well, my mother had a gallery around the corner. And a lot of the people, she was the director of the gallery that was owned by J.C. Williams. And so a lot of people knew I was a devotee. Anyway, what happened, which I had nothing to do with, but they thought I did, was that their lead ballet dancer, Nataraj, he became Nataraj, of the Melbourne Ballet Company, right in the middle of this section, had met the devotees and decided to leave the whole production and join the Hare Krishna temple. So he became Nataraj later on. So what happened was, Madhavisa thought, okay, this ballet dancer has joined, let's put a ballet on. So we decided that that's what was going to happen. So upstairs at Lonsdale Street, there was myself, Makala, and what was her name? What was it? Padmavati. Padmavati went to Switzerland. There's just the three girls, and a couple of Dormia was going to play Krishna. Madhavisa was going to play somebody, I can't remember. But anyway, so we practiced this play for the Ratha Yatra for 6 weeks upstairs. Every morning we'd arrive, and I'd been doing ballet, and I used to be twirling around in my toe shoes as Nataraj would arrive. And behind, there was a curtain in the middle of the room, and Lord Jagannath was being carved at the back while we were putting this performance on. And it was hysterical. Every morning we'd have to hold onto the bar and do beginning of ballet warm-ups and 1 and 2 production. It was just a riot. And Namal was going to play the music for it. So anyway, Ratha Yatra happened. It was my first big Ratha Yatra. And so we put the play on in a sort of a church hall at the back behind Myers. And it was pretty radical. The music was wildly hippie. And we had, the beginning of it was quite fun. We were like spirit souls coming across, and the whole stage was dark, and we had sparklers, and we'd be running across the stage so it looked like spirit souls in the spiritual world. That part looked really fantastic. At the end, we had this sort of a Durga thing, so we all got together and all our arms were stretched out like a 10-arm Durga or something. It was at the end, it was pretty radical, and someone had filmed it. And the music was, there was lots of psychedelic pictures at the back. And anyway, someone sent it to Srila Prabhupada, the film. It was really, all the hippies loved it. It was a great, so we were thinking, what we were going to do, we decided we were going to take the whole production all the way to Cairns on the double-decker bus. Anyway, Prabhupada saw it and said, no. It's just not going to happen whatsoever. We're not going to be doing this production all the way to Cairns. I just want you to go and preach and do Harinam. So we did, that's what happened. And Bhikra and I, we ended up on the double-decker bus with about, 8, 10 brahmacharis. And we went to Cairns and preached in every town and village. We'd stop and we'd do Harinam, and then we'd invite people back to the temple. But that's another whole story. I just wanted, the Lonsdale Street store was actually where Lord Jagannath was completely made as basically to the music of this craziness that was going on in the front of the curtain. He was being carved at the back. Anyway, that's just it's another whole story.
Thank you.
Haribol.
Thank you, Sukla. Hare Krishna. Okay, Prabhu, so now it's prasadam time. So the special guests will be having their prasadam over in Prabhupada House, and the devotees otherwise will be upstairs for prasadam there. Thank you all very much. Again, a warm welcome to all our guests, and it's going to be a wonderful festival. I hope you all partake, and see you back here at 10:30. Hare Krishna.
Is that all right? Did that sounded all right? I just wanted people to know about it.